The rain pounded against the windows of the small roadside cafe as Maylene wiped down the last table. She glanced at the clock, 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes past closing time. Her shoulders ached from the double shift she'd worked today. Just like every day since her parents passed away last year, the cafe was all she had left of them, and she was determined to keep it running, even if it meant 18-hour days and barely making ends meet. The wind howled outside, rattling the old window frames. At 22, Maylene sometimes wondered if this would be her whole life. Endless work in the small apartment upstairs that leaked when it rained hard, like tonight. Just as she was about to lock the door, headlights swept across the parking lot. A car pulled up, its engine sputtering before going silent. Maylene sighed. She really didn't need late customers tonight, but something made her wait. When the car door opened, a man stepped out, hunched against the rain. He quickly opened the back door to help a small boy out, covering the child with his own jacket as they ran toward the cafe. Maylene unlocked the door, letting them in from the downpour. They were both soaked despite their efforts. "Thank you," the man said, water dripping from his dark hair. "I know you're closed, but our car broke down about half a mile back. We tried to push through to the next town, but..." "It's okay," Maylene said, noticing how the boy was shivering. He looked about 8 years old with big eyes that reminded her of her little cousin. "Come sit down. I'll get some towels." The man looked relieved. "I'm James," he said, "and this is my son, Ethan." Maylene brought them some clean kitchen towels from the back. "I'm Maylene, this is my cafe." She turned up the heat and put on some hot water. "Tea? Or hot chocolate for the little one?" "Hot chocolate would be amazing," James said with a grateful smile. "We've had quite the adventure tonight." As Maylene prepared the drinks, she studied them from behind the counter. They didn't look like they were from around here. The man wore what had once been a nice button-up shirt, now wrinkled and wet. The boy was dressed in simple jeans and a t-shirt with dinosaurs on it. There was something about them. They didn't seem like the usual travelers who passed through. "Where were you headed?" she asked, setting down 2 steaming mugs. James wrapped his hands around the cup. "We were on our way back from a camping trip. We took a shortcut that wasn't such a shortcut after all." He smiled at his son, who was eagerly sipping his hot chocolate, leaving a small mustache of foam on his upper lip. "It was fun until it started raining," Ethan said. "Then Dad's car made a funny noise and stopped. I called for a tow truck," James explained, "but with the storm they can't come until morning. And my phone says the nearest hotel is 30 miles away." Maylene looked out at the rain, which was coming down even harder now. The roads would be flooded soon if they weren't already. She bit her lip, thinking about the small apartment upstairs. It wasn't much, but she couldn't send them back out into this weather, especially with a child. "Look," she said, making up her mind. "I have a place upstairs. It's not fancy, just 1 bedroom and a pull-out couch. But you're welcome to stay the night. It's not safe to be out in this." James looked up, surprise evident on his face. "We couldn't impose like that." "It's no imposition," Maylene said, though a small part of her wondered if she was being foolish letting strangers stay in her home. But looking at the tired boy, she knew she was doing the right thing. "Besides, where else will you go in this weather?" After a moment of hesitation, James nodded. "Thank you. That's incredibly kind. Are you hungry?" Maylene asked, already heading toward the kitchen. "I was about to throw out today's leftovers, but there's some soup and half a loaf of fresh bread." "You don't need to feed us too," James protested, but his stomach betrayed him with a loud growl that made Ethan giggle. "Dad, we didn't have dinner 'cause you said we'd stop at a restaurant." "But then the car broke," the boy reminded him. Maylene smiled. "It's decided then." She warmed up the soup and sliced the bread, adding a bit of butter she'd been saving. It wasn't much, but it would fill their stomachs. When she brought out the food, she gave Ethan the biggest bowl and set a smaller portion for herself and James. As they ate, Maylene learned that James and Ethan lived in the city, about 3 hours away. James talked about his work only vaguely, mentioning something about the company but never specifying what he did. Ethan was more talkative, describing their camping trip in excited detail, the fish they caught, the stars they saw, and how his dad taught him to make a fire. It was supposed to be a lesson about appreciating simple things, James explained with a smile, away from all the distractions of our regular life. After dinner, Maylene showed them upstairs. Her apartment was small, a living room with a kitchenette, 1 bedroom, and a bathroom. The furniture was worn but clean, arranged to make the most of the limited space. A few photos of her parents sat on a shelf, and colorful curtains brightened the otherwise plain walls. "I'll take the couch," she said, grabbing some extra blankets from a closet. "You and Ethan can have the bedroom." "Absolutely not," James said firmly. "We've already imposed enough. Ethan and I will be fine on the couch. Please keep your room." Maylin started to protest, but the determined look on James's face told her it would be useless. "At least let me give you some clean towels for the morning," she said. "The bathroom is through there, but be careful with the hot water. It runs out quickly." While James helped Ethan get ready for bed, Maylin noticed a small puddle forming in the corner of the living room. Another leak. She quietly placed a pot under it to catch the water, hoping James wouldn't notice. But he did. When he returned from tucking in his son on the pull-out couch, he pointed to the ceiling. "You have a problem with your roof," Maylin shrugged. "It only leaks when it rains really hard. I'll fix it eventually." "How long have you had the cafe?" James asked, sitting on the edge of the couch. "It was my parents," Maylin explained. "They opened it 20 years ago when they moved here. I grew up helping them." She smiled at the memory. "After they died in a car accident last year, I took over. It's not much, but it's home." James looked around the small apartment, his eyes taking in the water stains on the ceiling, the mismatched furniture, and the small electric heater that worked overtime to keep the place warm. "You run it all by yourself?" Maylin nodded. "Can't afford help right now, but I'm making it work." There was something in James's expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, perhaps, or concern. He seemed about to say something else, but instead just said, "Thank you again for your hospitality. Not many people would open their home to strangers." "Well," Maylin said with a small smile, "my mom always said kindness comes back to you somehow." She handed him an extra blanket. "Get some rest. I'll wake you in the morning when the tow truck can get through." As she turned to go to her room, James called softly, "Maylin?" She looked back. "Your parents would be proud of you," he said simply. Something warm spread through Maylin's chest at his words. She nodded, unable to speak past the sudden lump in her throat, and went into her bedroom. Through the thin walls, she could hear James whispering to Ethan, telling him a bedtime story. The sound was comforting in a way she hadn't expected. It had been a long time since her apartment had held any voices but her own. As the rain continued to drum on the roof, Maylin fell asleep thinking about her unexpected guests. There was something about James that seemed familiar, though she was certain they'd never met before. And despite their circumstances, there was a quiet dignity about him that made her curious. Who was this man really? And what would tomorrow bring when the storm cleared? Maylin woke to the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she was confused. She lived alone, and the ancient coffee maker had a timer that certainly didn't work. Then she remembered her guests from the night before. She quickly dressed and stepped into the living room to find the pull-out couch already folded away and the blankets neatly stacked. From the kitchenette came the sound of quiet movement. James stood there, his back to her, carefully pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs she'd had since college. "Good morning," she said. He turned, smiling. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to thank you for last night, and coffee seemed like a good start." "Not at all." She accepted the mug he offered. "Where's Ethan?" "Still asleep. The storm kept him up for a while." James nodded toward the bedroom door, left slightly ajar. "I hope that's okay. He finally fell into a deep sleep, and I didn't want to wake him." "Of course it's okay," Maylin said, taking a sip of the coffee. "It was good, better than she usually made." "Did you find everything you needed?" "Yes, and I hope you don't mind, but I tidied up a bit." James gestured around the apartment, and Maylin realized it was spotless. The dishes from last night were washed and put away. The floor had been swept. Even the collection of bills and papers on her small desk was neatly stacked. "You didn't have to do that," she said, feeling a little embarrassed that he'd seen the mess. "It's the least I could do. You saved us from spending the night in a broken-down car during a thunderstorm." He looked out the window where sunshine now streamed in, the storm having passed during the night. "I called the tow company again. They should be here within the hour." Maylin nodded, suddenly aware that once their car was fixed, these strangers who had somehow brightened at her lonely apartment would be gone. The thought made her sad in an unexpected way. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "I could make some breakfast before I open the cafe." "Actually," James said, "I was wondering if I could cook for you. I noticed you have some eggs and a bit of bread. How about some French toast? It's Ethan's favorite. Before she could protest, he was already pulling ingredients from her small refrigerator. There was something natural about the way he moved around her tiny kitchen, as if he'd been there before. It struck her as odd that he seemed so comfortable making do with her limited supplies and equipment. So, Maylene said, sitting at the small table, you never really told me what you do. For work, I mean. James cracked eggs into a bowl, his movements precise. I'm in business, he said vaguely. Mostly management. And you camp on weekends? She asked with a smile. He laughed softly. Not usually, no. This was a special trip. I wanted Ethan to experience something different from our everyday life. He dipped a slice of bread into the egg mixture. After his mother passed away 3 years ago, it's been important to me that he learns what really matters in life isn't things. I'm sorry about his mother, Maylin said quietly. James nodded his thanks. What about you? Have you always wanted to run the cafe? Maylin traced the rim of her coffee mug with her finger. Honestly? No. I was in college when my parents died, studying to be a teacher. But the cafe was their dream, their legacy. I couldn't bear to sell it. She looked up at him. So here I am. You gave up your dream for theirs, James said, flipping the French toast in the pan. It wasn't a question. I guess I did, Maylin admitted. She'd never said it out loud before. But it's okay. The cafe makes people happy. My parents put their hearts into it. And now you put yours into it, James said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her look away. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla filled the small apartment as James continued cooking. Soon, a small stack of golden brown French toast sat on a plate. Just as he was about to call for Ethan, the boy appeared in the bedroom doorway, hair tousled from sleep. Dad, you made French toast? His face lit up. Awesome. The three of them sat around Maylene's small table, the sunlight streaming in through the window making patterns on the worn tablecloth. Ethan talked excitedly about a dream he'd had involving a talking frog who drove a car, making both adults laugh. For a moment, Maylin could almost pretend they were just friends having breakfast together, not strangers who'd met by chance during a storm. After they ate, Maylin needed to open the cafe. James insisted on helping her bring down the chairs and wipe down the tables. You really don't have to, she protested. We want to, James insisted, handing a spray bottle to Ethan, who took his cleaning duties very seriously. As they worked, a regular customer came in, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived down the road. My goodness. Maylin, she said, eyeing James and Ethan with undisguised curiosity. You have help today? Just some friends, Maylin said, feeling her cheeks warm at the knowing look in the older woman's eyes. Their car broke down in the storm last night. Mrs. Chen ordered her usual green tea and a sesame ball and sat at her regular table by the window, not so subtly watching James as he effortlessly operated the espresso machine. It was an old model that even Maylin sometimes struggled with, yet he handled it like a professional. Your friend is very handsome, Mrs. Chen whispered when Maylin brought her tea. And good with children. Very important quality. It's not like that, Maylin whispered back. But Mrs. Chen just smiled and sipped her tea, clearly unconvinced. As the morning went on, the cafe filled with the usual customers. To Maylin's surprise, James stepped in to help take orders while she cooked, and Ethan charmed everyone by carefully delivering napkins and water to each table. Several customers asked if they were new staff, and Maylin found herself struggling to explain the unusual situation. Around 10 o'clock, a tow truck pulled up outside. The driver came in looking for James. Found your car, sir, he said. Just needed a new alternator. Got it fixed for you already, wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. That's great news, James said, pulling out his wallet. What do I owe you? As they discussed the repairs, Maylin felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down to find Ethan staring up at her, his eyes suddenly sad. Does this mean we have to go now? He asked. Maylin knelt down to his level. I'm afraid so. Your dad probably needs to get back to work and you might have school tomorrow. But I like it here, Ethan said. You make the best hot chocolate ever, and you let me put extra whipped cream on it. Maylin smiled. Well, anytime you and your dad are passing through, you're welcome to stop by for hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. Promise? Ethan held out his pinky finger solemnly. Promise, Maylin said, linking her pinky with his. After James paid the tow truck driver, there was an awkward moment when he and Ethan stood by the cafe door, clearly ready to leave but somehow reluctant. "I can't thank you enough," James said, his voice oddly formal now. "Your kindness last night." "It was nothing," Mei Lin interrupted, suddenly uncomfortable with his gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," James said firmly. "They wouldn't, trust me on that." He pulled out his wallet again. "Please let me pay you for the room and the meals." Mei Lin shook her head. "Absolutely not. It was my pleasure to help." "At least let me pay for the roof repair," he insisted. "I noticed it's leaking in several places, not just the living room." "James, really, it's fine," Mei Lin said, though the truth was she had no idea how she was going to afford those repairs. The cafe barely covered the bills as it was. He seemed about to argue further, but instead just nodded. "All right, but please know how much we appreciate what you did." He took a business card from his wallet and placed it on the counter. "If you ever need anything at all, please call." Mei Lin picked up the card, planning to be polite and slip it in her apron pocket. But something caught her eye. The card was simple and elegant with just a name and phone number. But the name made her breath catch. James Way. The Way Group was one of the largest companies in the country. Everyone knew of the Way family. Their businesses spanned everything from technology to real estate. And according to the business card in her hand, she'd just spent the night housing the CEO in her tiny, leaking apartment. She looked up in shock. But James just gave her a small smile and put his finger to his lips, glancing at the other customers in the cafe. "It was nice meeting you, Mei Lin," he said quietly. "Thank you again for everything." Before she could respond, Ethan rushed forward and hugged her around the waist. "Bye, Mei Lin. Remember your promise about the hot chocolate." And then they were gone, walking to the car that was now parked outside. Mei Lin watched through the window as they drove away, the business card still clutched in her hand, wondering if she'd imagined the whole strange encounter. It wasn't until she closed the cafe that evening and went upstairs that she realized something else. On her small kitchen table sat an envelope. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting. "Some people give even when they have little to give. Thank you for reminding Ethan and me what real generosity looks like. Jay." And underneath the note was a check with more zeros than Mei Lin had ever seen in her life. Mei Lin stared at the check in her hands, her fingers trembling. The amount written there could not only fix her leaking roof, but renovate the entire cafe and still leave enough to pay off her parents' medical bills that had piled up before they passed. This was life-changing money, but something didn't feel right. She couldn't just accept this. It felt too much like charity. And if there was one thing her parents had taught her, it was pride in hard work. They had built their cafe from nothing, working day and night. Taking this money felt like cheating somehow. She carefully folded the check and placed it back in the envelope, then tucked it into her desk drawer. She'd think about it tomorrow. Right now she was exhausted from the long day and the emotional roller coaster of meeting James and Ethan, discovering who James really was, and now this unexpected gift. Sleep came fitfully that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw James's face, the way he'd looked at her when she'd told him about giving up college to keep her parents' cafe running. There had been something in his expression that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a very long time. The next morning, Mei Lin went about her usual routine, prepping dough for the day's pastries, brewing coffee, and wiping down tables. But her mind kept wandering to the envelope in her desk drawer upstairs. Should she cash the check? Should she return it? Should she call the number on the business card? "You seem distracted today," Mrs. Chen commented when Mei Lin brought her the wrong tea for the first time in 3 years. "Is it because of that handsome man and his cute little boy? Did they get home safely?" "Yes, they're fine," Mei Lin said, quickly exchanging the black tea for green. "Sorry about the mix-up." "You know," Mrs. Chen said, leaning forward conspirationally, "my nephew works for a big company in the city, the Way Group. He says the CEO is a very good man, very fair to his employees." Mei Lin nearly dropped the teapot. "Is that so?" Mrs. Chen nodded sagely. "He lost his wife a few years ago, very sad. Raises his son alone even with all his money and businesses to run." She sipped her tea and looked pointedly at Mei Lin. "A man like that would make a good husband, don't you think?" "Mrs. Chen!" Mei Lin felt her face grow hot. It wasn't like that at all. They just needed a place to stay during the storm. Mrs. Chen just smiled knowingly and returned to her newspaper, leaving Mei Lin to wonder if somehow the older woman had guessed James's identity. The bell over the cafe door jingled, and Mei Lin turned, half expecting, hoping to see James and Ethan again. Instead, a tall man in a hard hat and work clothes stood there looking around. "Can I help you?" Mei Lin asked. "Are you Mei Lin?" The man asked. When she nodded, he continued, "I'm Lee from Summit Construction. I'm here about the roof repair." Mei Lin blinked in confusion. "I didn't call anyone about the roof." The man pulled out a work order. "Got an order right here. Full inspection and repair of the roof at Sunrise Cafe, plus some renovations to the kitchen and dining area. Already paid in full." He looked up at her. "From HOA Industries. Says here to coordinate all details with the owner. That's you, right?" Mrs. Chen's newspaper lowered slowly, her eyes wide as she listened to the exchange. "There must be some mistake," Mei Lin said, her heart racing. "I didn't authorize any repairs or renovations." The construction worker scratched his head. "Well, the paperwork's all in order, ma'am. Permits are already filed too. We're ready to start tomorrow if that works for you." "Tomorrow?" Mei Lin squeaked. "But I can't close the cafe. It's the only income I have." "Don't worry about that," Lee said with a reassuring smile. "The plan includes compensation for lost business during renovations, and we'll work in stages so you can stay partially open." He handed her a thick folder. "All the details are in here. Take a look and give me a call if you have any questions or want to make changes. The designs are just suggestions. You have final say on everything." Stunned, Mei Lin accepted the folder. Thank you. I'll look these over." After Lee left, Mei Lin sank into a chair, the folder heavy in her lap. Mrs. Chen appeared at her side, curiosity written all over her face. "Roof repairs? Renovations? Paid in full?" she asked eagerly. "By HOA Industries?" "It's not what you think," Mei Lin said quickly. "Oh? And what do I think?" Mrs. Chen's eyes twinkled. "That James Mr. Wei, that we're..." Mei Lin struggled to find the words. "That he's a good man who recognizes another good person when he meets one," Mrs. Chen suggested gently. "There's no shame in accepting help, Mei Lin. Your parents would want you to take care of yourself too, not just their cafe." Before Mei Lin could respond, Mrs. Chen patted her hand and returned to her seat, leaving Mei Lin with her thoughts and the heavy folder of renovation plans. That evening, after closing the cafe, Mei Lin finally gathered the courage to open the folder. Inside were detailed drawings of her cafe, but reimagined. The cozy but worn space had been transformed in the designs. New flooring, better lighting, an expanded kitchen with modern equipment, and a lovely outdoor seating area. But what touched her most was that the essential character remained. The designs kept the warm, homey feel her parents had created, just with necessary updates and improvements. Along with the plans was a letter on HOA Industries letterhead, signed by James himself. "Dear Mei Lin," it read, "please accept these renovations not as charity, but as an investment in a business I believe in. Your cafe has the potential to be even more successful with a few updates. I've also included a proposal for a small business loan through HOA Financial at an extremely favorable rate, should you wish to expand your menu or hours once the renovations are complete. This is a business transaction, not a gift. I expect to be repaid in excellent coffee, and perhaps the occasional slice of that remarkable apple cake Ethan hasn't stopped talking about since we left. All my best, James Wei." Mei Lin read the letter 3 times. Each time she could hear James's voice, firm but kind, insisting this was a business decision. She looked at the check she'd left in her desk drawer, then back at the letter. He had found a way to help her that wouldn't wound her pride. But still, she hesitated. The next morning, Mei Lin called the number on James's business card. She expected to reach a secretary or assistant, but after just 2 rings, James himself answered. "Mei Lin," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I was hoping you'd call, Mr. Wei," she began formally. "Please, it's still James to you," he interrupted. "James," she amended. "I received the renovation plans and your investment offer." "And?" He sounded nervous, which surprised her. What did a billionaire CEO have to be nervous about? "It's too much," she said plainly. "The check, the renovations, it's too generous. I can't accept it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then James spoke, his voice softer. "Mei Lin, do you know what Ethan said to me after we left your cafe?" "What?" she asked, caught off guard by the question. He said, "Dad, Maylin's house is small, but it feels big inside." When I asked him what he meant, he said, "It's full of the right stuff, not things, but like the stuff you can't see. Out of the mouths of babes, right?" James chuckled. He was right, though. Your cafe has something special, something authentic that no amount of money can create. That's worth investing in. Maylin felt her throat tighten with emotion. "My parents would say the same thing," she said quietly. "About the check," James continued. "That's separate from the renovations. That's a personal thank you from Ethan and me. Use it for your education if you want, or save it for emergencies. But please don't return it. Let us do this one thing for you." Maylin took a deep breath. "I'll accept the renovations," she said slowly, "as a business investment. But the check is non-negotiable," James finished firmly. "Sometimes, Maylin, the kindest thing you can do for someone who wants to help is to let them help." His words struck a chord in her. Hadn't she felt the same way when James had initially refused her offer of shelter during the storm? Sometimes giving was as much for the giver as for the recipient. "Okay," she said finally, "but I want to add one condition to our business arrangement." "Name it," James said immediately. "When the renovations are done, you and Ethan have to come for the grand reopening." She surprised herself with the boldness of the request. There was a moment of silence. Then James laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made Maylin smile despite herself. "We wouldn't miss it for the world," he promised. A week later, the renovations began. As promised, Lee and his team worked in sections, allowing Maylin to keep part of the cafe open. The regulars didn't seem to mind the construction. In fact, they were excited about the changes, especially after Maylin explained that a customer had been so impressed with her coffee that his company had offered to invest in the cafe. Mrs. Chen, of course, saw right through this explanation. "A customer, she said with a knowing smile. "A very special customer, I think." Maylin just smiled and refilled her tea. The roof was fixed first, ending the constant drip of water into strategically placed buckets whenever it rained. Then came the kitchen upgrades. New appliances that worked properly, more counter space, and better storage. The dining area renovations brought new tables and chairs, warm lighting, and a fresh coat of paint in the exact shade of sunny yellow that her mother had always loved. Through it all, Maylin found herself sending pictures to James of the construction progress, of a particularly beautiful sunset from her newly repaired roof, of the first batch of pastries she made in her new oven. He always responded quickly, despite what must have been his incredibly busy schedule, often sending back pictures of Ethan giving a thumbs up or silly faces. One evening, as Maylin was sorting through the day's receipts in her renovated cafe, she realized something had shifted inside her. The weight of grief and responsibility that had pressed down on her since her parents' death felt lighter somehow. She was still carrying on their legacy, but now she was also building something of her own. And it had all started with a random act of kindness on a stormy night, letting a stranger and his son stay for one night. A stranger who turned out to be so much more than she could have ever imagined. The renovations were completed in just over 3 weeks, transforming the tired old Sunrise Cafe into something Maylin could barely believe was hers. The last construction worker left on a Friday evening, and Maylin stood in the middle of her cafe, turning slowly to take it all in. The worn linoleum floor had been replaced with warm wooden planks. The mismatched tables and chairs were now a coordinated set in a rich honey color. New windows let in more light, and gentle ceiling fans circulated the air. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances and smooth countertops. Even the sign outside had been redone, still carrying the original design her father had sketched 20 years ago, but now illuminated with soft lighting. Yet despite all these changes, the heart of the place remained. The wall of family photos her mother had started was untouched, though now protected behind clean glass. The special teapot her grandmother had brought from the old country still sat in its place of honor near the register. The renovation team had been remarkably careful to preserve these personal touches. Maylin had already planned the grand reopening for Sunday, just 2 days away. She'd sent invitations to all her regular customers and put up flyers around the neighborhood. She'd been experimenting with new recipes all week. Wanton. She'd debut some special items to celebrate. There was just one invitation she was particularly nervous about. She'd sent a formal invitation to James at his office address, but she'd also texted him the details, adding a personal note. The investor's presence is requested at the grand reopening. The apple cake baker's presence is required. Ethan had responded from his father's phone with a row of excited emojis, but James himself had only written, "We'll try our best." Maylin tried not to be disappointed. She understood how busy he must be running a massive corporation. Still, she'd found herself checking her phone more often than usual, hoping for another message. Saturday was spent in a whirlwind of preparation. Maylin baked from dawn until dusk, cookies, cakes, pastries, and of course, her special apple cake. Mrs. Chen and a few other loyal customers stopped by to help with the final touches, arranging flowers, tying balloons, and setting up the new outdoor seating area. "So will he come?" Mrs. Chen asked as they folded napkins together. She didn't need to specify who he was. "I don't know," Maylin admitted. "He's very busy." Mrs. Chen made a dismissive noise. "Not too busy for you, I think." "It's not like that," Maylin insisted, though her cheeks warmed. "It's a business relationship." Mrs. Chen hummed, clearly unconvinced. "And my grandson only plays video games for 1 hour a day." Maylin couldn't help but laugh. Mrs. Chen's grandson was notorious for his gaming marathons. As the sun began to set, Maylin's phone chimed with a text. Her heart leapt. But it wasn't from James. It was from Lee, the construction foreman, wishing her good luck tomorrow and saying he'd try to stop by. Maylin texted back her thanks, ignoring the pang of disappointment. She was just closing up for the night when a sleek black car pulled up outside. Maylin's breath caught in her throat. The driver's door opened and a woman in a crisp suit stepped out. Not James, then. The woman approached the door and knocked politely, though she could clearly see Maylin inside. Maylin opened the door cautiously. "We're closed until tomorrow's reopening, but if you'd like to come back, then—" "Ms. Maylin," the woman interrupted politely. "I'm Lily, Mr. Wei's assistant. He asked me to deliver this to you personally." She handed Maylin a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Oh, thank you," Maylin said, taking the package. "Will Mr. Wei be attending the reopening tomorrow?" Lily's professional expression gave nothing away. "I'm not at liberty to discuss Mr. Wei's schedule, ma'am. Have a good evening." And with that, she returned to the car and drove away, leaving Maylin standing in the doorway with the package in her hands. Inside, she carefully unwrapped it. Nestled in tissue paper was a small wooden plaque, hand-carved with the words, "Dreams Reimagined," and below it, in smaller letters, "In memory of Lin and Hui Zhang," her parents' names. Tears sprang to Maylin's eyes. Tucked beneath the plaque was a card with a handwritten note. "Every dream deserves a second chance. Wishing you all the success your parents would have wanted for you and that you deserve. James and Ethan." Maylin ran her fingers over the carved letters, her vision blurring. How had James known her parents' names? She'd never told him. He must have researched them, gone out of his way to create this meaningful gift. It was so personal, so thoughtful. Yet the note also carried a tone of finality, as if this was a goodbye gift. Maybe he wouldn't be coming tomorrow after all. Maylin hung the plaque on the wall near the entrance, where everyone would see it. Then she went upstairs to her apartment, also renovated now, with a properly sealed roof and new windows that kept out the draft, and tried to sleep, despite the butterflies in her stomach about tomorrow's big day. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Maylin was up before the sun, making final preparations. She'd decided to open at 10, giving herself plenty of time to set everything up perfectly. By 9:30, a small crowd had gathered outside. Maylin's heart swelled at the sight of so many familiar faces, people who had supported her parents' cafe for years and had continued to support her after they were gone. At precisely 10 o'clock, Maylin opened the doors. The crowd applauded as they entered, oohing and aahing over the transformations. Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, declaring that Maylin's parents would be so proud. The morning flew by in a blur. The cafe was packed, every table full, with people waiting for seats. Maylin had hired 2 local teenagers to help for the day, and they rushed back and forth, serving coffee and pastries while Maylin worked the kitchen and greeted customers. By noon, Maylin was tired but exhilarated. The reopening was a success beyond her wildest dreams. She'd already sold out of several items and had to quickly make more. She was just coming out of the kitchen with a fresh tray of pastries when the bell over the door jingled again. Maylin looked up, her practiced welcome smile freezing on her face. James stood in the doorway, looking not like the powerful CEO he was, but like the rain-soaked stranger she'd met weeks ago, in simple jeans and a button-up shirt. Beside him, Ethan bounced excitedly, his eyes already fixed on the pastry case. The cafe had grown suddenly quiet, as if everyone sensed something important was happening. Even Mrs. Chen, who never stopped talking, was silent, watching with undisguised interest. "Hi," Maylin said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. "Hello," James replied, his own voice equally soft. Then he smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had first made her trust him on that stormy night. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was terrible coming out of the city." "You're here," Maylin said, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "That's all that matters." Ethan broke the moment by darting forward. "Maylin!" The cafe looks so cool, and Dad said I could have any cake I want. Do you still have the apple one? That's my favorite ever. Maylin laughed, some of the tension broken. "I made it especially for you, Ethan." She led them to the only empty table tucked in a quiet corner by the window. "I saved this spot just in case." As she brought them coffee and cake, Maylin was aware of the curious glances from her other customers. She'd told everyone that the renovations were funded by a business investor, but she hadn't mentioned any names. Now, with James sitting in her cafe, questions were bound to arise. Sure enough, Mrs. Chen managed to position herself near their table, pretending to admire the new curtains while obviously eavesdropping. Maylin shot her a warning look, which the older woman blithely ignored. "The cafe looks amazing," James said when Maylin finally had a moment to sit with them. "You've done wonderful things with it." "I had help," Maylin said meaningfully. "Quite a lot of it, actually." James shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "The potential was always here. I just provided the resources for you to realize it." Ethan, his face smeared with apple cake, looked between the two adults with interest. "Dad says you're really smart and hardworking," he announced. "He says you're the kind of person who makes the world better." "Ethan," James said, a warning note in his voice. "What?" "You did say that," Ethan protested. "You said she reminds you of Mom because she's kind and never gives up." An awkward silence fell. James looked mortified, and Maylin felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Your mom must have been a wonderful person," she said gently to Ethan. The boy nodded enthusiastically. "She was the best. Dad has a picture of her in his office. She was really pretty like you." James cleared his throat. "Ethan, why don't you go look at the dessert case and pick something else to try?" Once Ethan was out of earshot, James turned to Maylin. "I'm sorry about that. He doesn't always understand what should be kept private." "It's okay," Maylin said. "It's nice that you keep her memory alive for him." James nodded, his expression softening. "Lisa would have liked you. She believed in helping people find their path." He looked around the cafe. "This place is special. I could feel it even that first night, with the rain coming through the roof and only one working burner on your stove." Maylin laughed at the memory. "It was a mess, wasn't it?" "A beautiful mess," James corrected. He hesitated, then added, "like most worthwhile things in life." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Maylin felt her heart beating faster. The moment was broken when Ethan returned, declaring he wanted to try every kind of cookie in the display case. The conversation turned to lighter topics: the cafe's new menu items, Ethan's school projects, a funny story about James's executive team getting food poisoning from a fancy corporate lunch. As the afternoon wore on, the cafe began to empty out. Eventually, only a few tables remained occupied. Maylin's helpers had cleaned most of the kitchen, and the day's success was evident in the nearly empty pastry cases. "We should probably go," James said finally, checking his watch. "You must be exhausted, and we have a long drive back." Maylin felt a pang of disappointment but nodded. "Thank you for coming. It meant a lot to me. Are we still coming back next Sunday?" Ethan asked, looking between the adults. Maylin blinked in surprise. "Next Sunday?" James looked slightly flustered. "I mentioned to Ethan that we might make this a regular weekend trip if that's okay with you. He's been talking about your hot chocolate for weeks." "That would be wonderful," Maylin said, trying to contain her smile. "I'll make sure to have plenty of whipped cream on hand." As they stood to leave, James hesitated. "I saw the plaque by the door. I hope it wasn't too presumptuous. It was perfect, Maylin assured him. How did you know my parents' names? James smiled. I do own a large research company, you know. Finding out the names of the original owners of this cafe wasn't exactly our most challenging assignment. At the door, Ethan hugged Maylin tightly. See you next week. Dad says we can come early and maybe go to the park too. James shook his head, looking amused at his son's enthusiasm. If that's all right with Maylin, she might have other plans. No, Maylin said quickly. No other plans. The park sounds nice. As they walked to their car, Maylin noticed Mrs. Chen watching from her table, a knowing smile on her face. Maylin ignored her, waving goodbye as James and Ethan drove away. That evening, as she counted the day's earnings, more than she'd ever made in a single day, Maylin's phone chimed with a text from James. Ethan fell asleep on the drive home, dreaming of apple cake. Thank you for today. See you next Sunday. Maylin hugged the phone to her chest, looking around at her beautiful cafe. The plaque caught her eye. Dreams reimagined. Yes, that was exactly right. Her parents' dream reimagined. And perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of a new dream altogether. 6 months had passed since the grand reopening of Sunrise Cafe. The seasons had changed from the last days of summer through fall and into winter, and now the first hints of spring were appearing. Throughout these changes, one thing had remained constant. Every Sunday, a sleek black car would pull up outside the cafe, and James and Ethan would step out, bringing smiles and stories from the city. These Sunday visits had become the highlight of Maylin's week. At first, they would simply spend a few hours at the cafe, with Ethan devouring sweets while James and Maylin talked over coffee. But gradually, their time together had expanded. Now they often went for walks in the nearby park, visited the local farmers market, or drove to the lake a few miles away. Once, they had even attended a small-town festival together, with Ethan winning a stuffed dragon at the ring toss that now sat proudly on Maylin's living room shelf. Today was a special Sunday. The cafe was closed for a private event, a celebration of 6 months since the reopening. Maylin had invited all her regular customers, and James had insisted on covering the costs, calling it a business milestone worth recognizing. Maylin stood in her kitchen, putting the finishing touches on a large cake, decorated with a miniature version of the cafe made of fondant. She wore a new dress, a simple blue one she'd bought specially for today. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail for work, hung loose around her shoulders. The sound of a car door closing made her heart skip. She glanced at the clock. They were early. Wiping her hands on a towel, she went to the front door. James stood there with Ethan, both of them carrying wrapped packages. In the months since they'd first met, James had relaxed around her. He dressed more casually for their Sunday visits, and the worried lines around his eyes that she'd noticed that first night had softened. Today he wore a light sweater and jeans, looking nothing like the powerful CEO he was for the rest of the week. "You're early," she said by way of greeting. Ethan couldn't wait, James explained with a smile. He's been up since 6, asking every 10 minutes if it was time to leave yet. I wanted to help set up. Ethan explained, bouncing on his toes. At 9 years old now, he'd grown an inch or two since that stormy night, but his enthusiasm remained unchanged. And we brought presents. Presents? But it's not my birthday, Maylin said, stepping back to let them in. It's the cafe's half-birthday, Ethan said seriously. That deserves presents too. Inside, Maylin had already arranged tables and chairs to accommodate the 30 or so guests who would be arriving in a couple of hours. Colorful spring flowers adorned each table, and string lights had been hung across the ceiling, ready to be turned on when evening fell. Ethan immediately ran to the cake, his eyes wide. Wow, is that our cafe? It looks just like it. It's the cafe, Maylin confirmed, pleased by his reaction. Do you like it? It's awesome. Dad, look at the tiny tables. And there's even the sign with the sun rising. Ethan circled the cake, taking in every detail. Wait, are those tiny people supposed to be us? He pointed to 3 small fondant figures standing by the cafe entrance. Maylin felt her cheeks warm. Well, yes. That's you with the blue shirt, and that's your dad, and that's me. James came to look, his shoulder brushing against hers. It's incredible, Maylin. You're very talented. Thanks, she said softly, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. These moments had been happening more frequently, times when the air between them seemed charged with something neither of them had put into words. Ethan broke the moment by thrusting his package toward Mei Lin. Open mine first. Inside was a clay sculpture that Ethan had clearly made himself, a lumpy but recognizable teapot painted in bright colors. It's for your special tea corner, Ethan explained. I made it in art class. My teacher helped with the handle, but I did everything else. It's beautiful, Mei Lin said, genuinely touched. I'll put it right next to Grandma's teapot. James's gift was in a smaller package. Inside was a delicate silver charm bracelet with just 3 charms, a tiny cafe, a book, and a small compass. The cafe is obvious, James said as Mei Lin examined it. The book is for your teaching dream, the one you put on hold. And the compass, he paused. That's to remind you that it's never too late to find your direction. Mei Lin looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It's perfect. Thank you. Dad picked the charms himself, Ethan announced proudly. He spent forever at the jewelry store trying to find the right ones. James cleared his throat, looking slightly embarrassed. Well, I wanted it to be meaningful. It is, Mei Lin assured him, slipping it onto her wrist. More than you know. As they prepared for the party, moving together around the cafe with the ease of people who had spent many hours in each other's company, Mei Lin found herself watching James. Something had shifted between them over these months. The business relationship had become a friendship, and lately she'd begun to wonder if there might be something more. But she was cautious. James was, after all, one of the richest men in the country. His world was so different from hers, and there was Ethan to consider. The boy had grown attached to her, often calling her first thing in the morning before school to tell her about a dream he'd had or a project he was working on. She cared deeply for both of them and was afraid of doing anything that might jeopardize their Sunday visits. Guests began arriving at exactly 4 o'clock. Mrs. Chen was first, of course bringing along her 3 friends from her mahjong group who had become regulars at the cafe. Lee, the construction foreman, came with his wife and daughter. The young couple who ran the bookshop down the street arrived with a gift, a beautiful cookbook they had special ordered for Mei Lin. Soon the cafe was filled with laughter and conversation. Mei Lin moved among her guests, pouring tea and coffee, making sure everyone had enough to eat. She caught glimpses of James throughout the evening, helping an elderly gentleman to a seat, listening intently to a story from the local schoolteacher, making sure Ethan didn't eat too many sweets. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. This sense of community, of belonging, of having created something meaningful. Her parents would indeed be proud. As the evening wore on, Mrs. Chen clinked her spoon against her teacup, calling for attention. I think we should have a toast, she announced. To Mei Lin, who has given us not just good food and drink, but a place where we all feel welcome. To Mei Lin. Everyone echoed, raising their cups. Mei Lin felt herself blush. Thank you all for coming today. This cafe was my parents' dream, but all of you have helped make it mine too. Her eyes found James in the crowd. And special thanks to the investor who made these renovations possible, and who believed in this place even when I wasn't sure I did. James nodded, a small private smile passing between them. After the toast, Mr. Liu from the hardware store brought out his violin and began to play, the sweet music filling the cafe. Some of the guests pushed back tables to create space for dancing. Mei Lin watched, smiling, as elderly couples swayed together and children hopped around in their own interpretation of dancing. She was so absorbed in watching that she didn't notice James approach until he was standing beside her. Would you like to dance? He asked quietly. Oh, I'm not very good, she demurred. Neither am I, he admitted with a laugh. Corporate events usually involve more handshaking than dancing. Something about his self-deprecating humor gave her courage. In that case, yes. I'd love to. James took her hand, leading her to the impromptu dance floor. He placed one hand lightly on her waist, keeping a respectful distance between them as they began to move to the music. Mei Lin was acutely aware of his touch, of the warmth of his hand holding hers. Thank you, he said after a moment, his voice low enough that only she could hear. For what? You're the one who's done so much for me. He shook his head. For giving Ethan and me somewhere to belong on Sundays. For making him laugh. He hesitated. For being you. The music swelled, and somehow they had moved closer together, the space between them disappearing. Maylin could feel the steady beat of his heart against her own. "Maylin," James said, his voice suddenly serious. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." "What is it?" she asked, looking up at him. Before he could answer, there was a crash from across the room. They broke apart to see Ethan standing over a broken plate, his face crimson with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he called out. "I was trying to help clear the tables." "It's okay, buddy," James called back, giving Maylin an apologetic look before going to help his son. Maylin watched them together, James kneeling down to help Ethan clean up the mess, speaking softly to the boy who looked close to tears. She saw how gently James ruffled Ethan's hair, how the boy leaned against his father for comfort. They were such a good team, those two. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Maylin found herself both exhilarated and exhausted. The party had been a success, but more than that, she felt a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. Finally, only James and Ethan remained. The boy had fallen asleep on one of the cafe sofas, curled up under his father's jacket. "I should get him home," James said, looking fondly at his son. "He's had a big day." "You both should rest," Maylin agreed. "The drive back to the city is long and you have work tomorrow." James hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying something important. Instead, he asked, "What about you? What are your plans for the week?" Maylin smiled. "Actually, I have some news. I've enrolled in online courses to finish my teaching degree. I'll still run the cafe, but I can study in the evenings." James's face lit up. "Maylin, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. The charm you gave me, the book, it reminded me that it's not too late. So I applied and I was accepted." "Of course you were," he said, his pride evident. "You're going to be an amazing teacher." They stood there in the dimly lit cafe, the sleeping boy on the couch, the remains of the celebration around them, a perfect moment that neither seemed willing to break. Finally, James spoke. "What I was going to ask you earlier, before the plate broke." He took a deep breath. "Maylin, would you consider coming to the city next weekend? I'd like to show you and Ethan my world, the way you've shown us yours." Maylin felt her heart skip. This wasn't just another Sunday visit. This was something new, something that crossed the bridge between their two separate lives. "I'd like that," she said simply. James smiled, relief and happiness washing over his face. "Good, that's really good." As he gently woke Ethan and helped the sleepy boy to the car, Maylin followed them out into the cool spring evening. The stars were bright overhead and the air smelled of possibility. "See you next Sunday," James said, his hand lingering on hers as they said goodbye. "And the weekend after in the city," she reminded him. "It's a date," he said, then looked momentarily flustered. "I mean, it's a plan, an arrangement." Maylin laughed softly. "It's a date," she confirmed, enjoying the way his eyes widened slightly. As their car pulled away, Maylin stood outside her cafe, her dream reimagined, and thought about how sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, like offering shelter on a stormy night, could change everything. She touched the charm bracelet on her wrist, the tiny compass catching the moonlight. She was no longer the struggling young woman trying desperately to keep her parents' dream alive. She was Maylin Zhang, cafe owner, future teacher, and a woman who had found her direction at last. And somehow, impossibly, that direction seemed to be leading her toward a CEO who had once been just a stranger in need of shelter, and the little boy who had stolen a piece of her heart with his love of apple cake and extra whipped cream. Life, Maylin decided as she turned to go back inside, was full of the most wonderful surprises. Prompt. Emotional cinematic moment. At the misty foot of a towering mountain, a poor mud-streaked girl kneels in the rain, desperately tending to an unconscious man, unaware he's a powerful tycoon. As he slowly opens his eyes and locks gazes with her, awe and gratitude flood his face. Dramatic high-contrast lighting cuts through the moody gloom, casting soft shadows that highlight her selfless exhaustion and his dawning realization. In the blurred background, hikers and rescue workers stand frozen in stunned silence. Realistic storytelling, deep emotion, shallow depth of field, soft focus on the foreground, crafted like a gripping film still. Optimized for a YouTube short thumbnail, raw, transformative, and visually magnetic.